Hello everybody, my name is Jessica Traynor and welcome to Ballina Fringe Festival and this special event on Correspondences, an anthology to call for an end to direct provision, which was edited by myself and Stephen Rea and featuring two of the wonderful artists who are featured in the anthology, Annemarie and Evgeny Shtorn. I'd like to welcome them both here. It's really lovely to have them. And tonight what we're going to do is we're going to have a few small readings and a little bit of discussion about correspondences, about these two artists and their current work, and also about the current political system in Ireland, where we are with direct provision, especially in the time of COVID-19, and where we hope we might be in the future. So I'd like to introduce, I suppose, the concept of Correspondences, the anthology, and why it came about and how it came about, just for those of you who haven't managed to get your hands on the book yet. So this was an anthology that came about from some discussions between myself and actor and co-editor Stephen Rea, and also with Billy Hall, Dr. Billy Hall, who's based in UCD. And Stephen Rea, through the Field Day Company, had been doing a lot of work on direct provision, and they had run a series of lectures in 2017 called the Right to Have Rights lecture series. And through that lecture series, a number of people and artists who were based in direct provision came forward to share their stories and also to share their artwork. And myself and Stephen were chatting after one of these events about how we might help people in Ireland have a greater access, or give them the impetus to have a greater access to the stories of people and the experiences of people in direct provision. And one of the challenges in this area being that the system itself really succeeds in segregating and isolating people in the system from communities, which leads to a number of problems and makes it a very easy problem for people to ignore. And I think we all know that in Irish society, in the 100 years or so since the birth of the state, we have become past masters at ignoring problems within our societies or locking them away out of sight. And often, and I know Annemarie and Evgeny, I'm sure you'll feel this yourselves, but as an artist, there is a sense of, well, what can I actually do to help? And how can my skill set become useful in any way, in a meaningful way? And, you know, we all come across the oft repeated quote, poetry makes nothing happen. But I think as artists, we do all believe in the transformative power of empathy. That's something we can discuss more later. And that, you know, that there is something to be said in the power of sharing a story and allowing people to become aware, a little bit more aware. So the idea for the anthology was born. But I was also very wary from the outset of the project, of the notion of creating an anthology that connected with people within a system, asked them for some work, shone the spotlight on their experiences, and then vanished from their lives completely. I was very aware that that can be quite a traumatic process and experience for people, and that asking people in a system like direct provision to share their artistry and their selves and their stories is a big ask. And I was aware that direct provision is not full of artists sitting around being asked, you know, waiting for a commission to paint a picture. It's full of people from all over the world, from various different backgrounds, who want to get on with their lives, and that's what they want to do. And of course, art is something that's very important to all of us, but it's something that can be partaken in when we have stability in our lives, when we have a firm foundation. So I was hoping to try and facilitate some sort of longer term connection after the anthology, which we hoped would be successful and thankfully has been, but after the limelight passed on to another issue or to another initiative to try and bring these particular stories to light. And so I lit upon the idea, which, you know, was naive, I think, and but well-meaning, and hopefully has ended well, of trying to invite a kind of a mentorship process between Irish artists, mostly writers, because as a writer myself, those are the people I know, and artists and writers in direct provision, so that they could correspond with each other, have chats about the work, offer suggestions, and hopefully create a connection that might outlast this process. And so here we are. almost 12 months on from the launch of the book in November 2019. And I'm happy to say during that time, the project has raised €15,000 for MASI, the Movement of Asylum Seekers in Ireland. And the book is completely sold out in most bookshops. I would like to say to people at this stage that it is available through the public library system, which I think is a fantastic thing. Because that for me, I think is a great legacy for the book and these stories. So we have with us tonight Annemarie and Evgeny, who are two of the pairings from the anthology. And when I first read Evgeny's poems when they came in, I thought they were just absolutely beautiful and moving. And something in them really reminded me of Annemarie's work. Annemarie, a wonderful poet and a friend of mine. And I suggested that the two of them might work together to create some companion pieces in the book. So we have 3 of Evgeny's poems and one of Annemarie's that was written in response to her work with Evgeny. And for me, I thought it was a very special partnership. I was particularly delighted with the work that came out of it. And what I'd love to do now, just so that you can get a sense of the work, is I'll introduce both our artists properly, and then I'll ask them both to read. Although it's the usual thing, but neither of them need too much of an introduction. So Annemarie is a poet from Northwest Donegal. Her wonderful collection, debut collection, Blood Rouge from 2017, was shortlisted for the Shine Strong Award and for the Julie Suk Award in the USA. She's the author of a suite of poems about Dublin entitled Town, which is from the Salvage Press. And she is the recipient of a Next Generation Artist Award from the Arts Council. And she's also one of the inaugural recipients of the Markievicz Award. And she's working on some very exciting work there with some other wonderful poets. And I hope we'll hear a little bit more about that later. And she was the 2019 to 2020 writer in residence at NUI Maynooth. And she's joining us tonight from the Centre Culturel Irlandais in Gay Paris. I'm going to ask you now, Annemarie, if you don't mind, to read your poem from the book. And then, just so we're not totally bogged down in introductions, I'll then introduce Evgeny properly afterwards. Thanks, Annemarie.
Lovely to be participating in the festival, Jessica, and lovely to see you again, Evgeny. And I think you touched on something really important there when talking about the project. Not only has Correspondences raised all this money and created great conversation and awareness, but it's also created a space for friendship. And one of the great things to come out of this project for me was the friendship with Evgeny. So it's a real thrill to be reunited in this space briefly. And what I'll do is I'll read the poem that I wrote in response to really working with Evgeny and our conversations about his experiences. And I also tried to bring to this particular poem some of my own life experiences as well, working with young children in the Irish foster care system. So this is called Postscript for a Country of Asylum. And if despite borders, you should find yourself gifted with a new son, you must remember that he owes you nothing. He is his own river untangling back and forth from a lamplit source. He is a foster child of the gods. He is a window opening in search of a country, a mother, a tongue by which the barely translatable can be spoken. Your task is simply to hold steady. Observe in the oak's shade the tiniest creatures, all come, go, and busy, all wise to loss and yet infinitely free in their desires. Let the why, how, what if piled up like deadwood fall away. Even the common starling, tumbling to the whole world, knows of roots and earth beyond imagination. More than curfews, trust the stilly afterlight of a wing.
Wonderful. Thanks so much for that, Annemarie. And I think that that's one of the many poems that seems to have taken on an even greater resonance in the COVID era. There's that sense that migration, which is such a constant in the world, and one of the phrases that I hate the most is the migrant crisis, because there is no point in history when people haven't moved from one place to the other. But even that process feels so much more circumscribed now. And I love that imagery of the starlings, which again, you know, one of nature's wonderful migrants that we only see as something beautiful. And it's amazing how you imagine that, you imagine a wonderful murmuration of starlings, and then you picture that hideous poster that Nigel Farage stood in front of during the Brexit campaigns. The breaking point poster that he put up, and you think, you know, we are capable as human beings of such great cognitive dissonance, you know. We can be in one thing and we can only look at something else as a threat. So thank you so much for sharing that, Annemarie. Evgeny, now to introduce Evgeny. He is a wonderful activist, writer and researcher originally from St. Petersburg, and due to his involvement in civil society work he was forced to leave Russia in 2018, and in 2019 he was granted international protection here in Ireland. He currently works as a social and cultural diversity consultant, collaborating with different universities and NGOs, including NUI Galway, UCD, Equality Fund at Rethink Ireland, and Create, and co-facilitates a project with people seeking asylum, which is called Something From There in the National Gallery of Ireland. Evgeny's writing has been published in academic journals, anthologies, news medias, and in news media outlets in Russia, Spain, Germany, and Ireland. And as an activist, he's been involved in human rights and LGBT advocacy for almost 2 decades. He's co-founder of Queer Diaspora Ireland, an initiative that supports LGBT people in direct provision. And in 2019, he was awarded the Inclusion Award by Galway Community Pride. And in 2020, Shtorn was awarded the Galas Person of the Year by the National LGBT Federation of Ireland. And so thank you so much again for joining us, Evgeny. It's such a fabulous biography to have been so active and made such an impact in so many parts of the world, putting the rest of us to shame. Would you mind now, Evgeny, reading us one of your poems from Correspondences?
I will, yeah. I just also wanted to say that that was an absolutely wonderful connection, and you really felt it. And among other mentors we were discussing initially, but you insisted, and I didn't know, Annemarie, and you said, I think it will work. And it really worked so wonderful, because basically it has to be, these 3 poems has to be co-authored, because the work that Annemarie put in these texts transformed them from a very poorly written
I'm going to disagree with that word poor. They're very, very rich to begin with.
But the thing that, you know, the one thing that when it really works, it's not when you're learning, but when you're unlearning certain things. And I think that what happened. I really unlearned certain bad habits as a writer, let's say, or as a text creator. I'm really struggling with this poet identity, but I appreciate that work, and I appreciate that experience. And also I wanted to say that Correspondences in 2019 became much more than just an anthology. It really platformed so many people and gave them so many chances in life. And not just me, but almost everyone who I know who was and has been involved really got their voices heard and met new people, new connections. And it's very important for those who find themselves completely alone in a new society, unknown society, and have to deal with very unpleasant things that is direct provision and the asylum process in general. And yeah, so this would be something that I wanted to acknowledge, that you really put a lot of energy, not just in building the anthology, but into promoting it. It was everywhere. It was in the Irish Times, it was in RT, it was in Aras, it was everywhere. So you really made a lot of post-production, sorry for this marketing term, work that was essential and crucial.
Oh, thank you, Evgeny.
And that was important. So I will read the poetry that I that I wrote, and then that became a poetry thanks to Annemarie and her work that she put in this text. And it called "They Will Come For You." Remember, when they come for you, day, or more likely night, remember, electric light on the stairs, or maybe dark. Remember, when they come for you, half-finished lemon tea. Remember, when they come for you, only words, smile, or silence, when they come for you, when they come for you. They won't remove their leather boots. They won't look at the black and white picture hanging on the wall, where you are smiling to your aunts, totally happy, 10 months old. They will never shrink their heart when they come for you. Remember that mild morning on the Onega Lake, when the water was extremely cold and extremely inviting, the clearest water you've ever seen. Remember that kiss that you give to your best friend, to that tall boy from your school, so good at chemistry, to lose him forever, to keep him forever in your tired chest. You were woven of the smallest details when they came for you. Thank you.
So beautiful. And I know that you're acknowledging Annemarie's help, but there are details in that poem that I will always remember from my very first reading of it, like the lemon tea, like the picture of the 10-month-old and the boy from the school kept in the chest. And I mean, that's just, those details, Evgeny, are just heartbreaking. And they do this wonderful thing, you know, that all poetry should do, which is to have these wonderful, particular, intimate details, but then also a chillingly universal aspect, which is the notion of these people, whoever they are, coming for you, you know, coming to take somebody away, coming to invade a home space. And that is an experience that could be, unfortunately, transplanted to so many different countries and regimes around the world. So, I mean, that's a poem that's just...
I feel quite emotional listening to it again after all this time. That repeated remember is such a mantra that is both really, really alarming and then is also really soothing. So it's a poem that really disorientates you and really gets down into your bones. I'm so proud of what Evgeny's done with that poem because it's really impactful. Hearing it again and hearing it in these times, because I remember meeting with Evgeny, you know, we at a time when we were able to meet and sit beside each other face to face and talk about these things, and so much has changed in the last year and that's just not possible now. So for lots of different reasons, I feel almost a little bit harrowed listening back to that poem.
Absolutely. But Evgeny, you've been writing for quite a while now, haven't you? And you've worked with other poets in Ireland as well. You've worked with Sarah Clancy too, haven't you?
Yes, that was a great experience too. In general, I submerge myself in a sense in this journey to, as I call it, like I cannot say right now that I'm working on a book collection, but it is something that I hope at some stage will be a book collection and a collection of poetry. And I call it translating from myself, because I basically, what I'm doing, I'm writing in Russian, and then I try to translate it myself from myself into English, because I don't think I dominate the language to an extent that I can create from the scratch the poetry in English, but I'm following this Russian poetry that I've written, and I try to kind of completely transform or translate it, because translation is not just when you put instead of Russian text, English text, but you sometimes have to adapt so many realities and so many things that you need to you wanna share the metaphor rather than the word, no? And this is and sometimes translating creates this new metaphorical space where I can use maybe badly translated thing, but it became a metaphor in English without me being conscious of it. So it's very subconscious. If my Russian poetry would be quite rational, because I'm a very rational person, my English poetry is much more naive and in these terms much more maybe subconscious, or subconscious, how you say it, subconscious.
But I think that's a wonderful process, Evgeny, and I think that it's probably something that gives your work a kind of a special tone that that sounds fresh and different. And also, I think anything that makes us as writers interrogate our words in that way, even if it makes it difficult, I think it can only be a good thing. And I was at an online workshop with the poet Ilya Kaminsky the other day, and he was talking about the poetry of Emily Dickinson, and he was saying, one of the things that he said that really struck me was that he said that she had never written a proper English sentence in her life, even though English was her first language, it was her mother tongue that she grew up in. The way that she wrote completely disrupted the English language. And so I think sometimes that is something that poets who are writing in their own language, they strive for, that sense of disruption or slight disconnect, but they can't make it happen. And Annemarie, do you find, as somebody who grew up in a Gaelic speaking area as a Gaeilgeoir, like, do you find that kind of disconnect in your own language as well at times?
Well, I always think that to be bilingual is such a gift in poetry, and to come to English as a second language is a real gift. And it's one of the things that I was just so swooned by with Evgeny's work, is the carefulness with which he's ferrying and accompanying meaning and imagery and memory from one language and one culture into another. And to just bear witness to that up close is really inspiring. So it is. And I suppose it's something that we're all the time doing in Ireland to some degree, because Irish was the language of our foremothers and our forefathers. So we're still on that journey really of accompanying meaning and language out of one place into another, which is a really special place to be, I think, as a culture of writers.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Yeah, it is interesting, and I think that there's such a particular Irish syntax which is so original and unique, and often we don't realize how singular our speech patterns are until we go to other countries, until I go to London and realize that people, even though people often don't know where I'm from in Ireland because I don't have a very strong accent, but I go to London and people can't really understand me, which is so strange when it's the same language. But Evgeny, now that you're out of the direct provision system, and now that I'm hoping your life has returned to whatever kind of normality it can, do you find your writing has changed? Do you find that you're exploring different subjects and themes now? How are you? Is it easier to write, or is it more difficult?
It is almost impossible to write in the confinement. I found it quite challenging, because the life space is very reduced, and it's really like I moved out in October, but the winter was quite busy with settling down and things like that. And then I got my travel document in February, and I remember saying, the first place I wanted to go was the place I don't know anyone, and it was Milan, and I wanted to go to La Scala. I had this strict desire to go to opera and to do something completely forgotten and strange. And I have a lot of friends in Europe, a lot of friends in different countries, and they all would be happy to host me, and they all were inviting me, but I precisely wanted to go to a place where I don't know anyone. And we bought tickets and everything. And the day we were supposed to be in Milan, Italy closed. So the confinement started. And that was the whole process of finding ourselves in the flat where we were supposed to kind of spend few months, but we ended up spending more, and there were no place, there were no even writing tables, so the rec provision transformed into confinement, and I really didn't have this space in between, and only now we recently moved to another house where we really feel comfortable, just over a month ago, and that's the first time when I just finished an essay that I was commissioned, and that was the first time when I was really writing something, and I was feeling that I'm not that I am doing something that I like, because I didn't have a chance. In the confinement, the quarantine, or all this period, it's something that really, I don't think it's an inspirational experience. And I speak with other friends, and I don't know, maybe Annemarie or you, Jessica, maybe you experienced it differently, but I didn't find it as a place to create. It was a place of hopeless waiting, as well as direct provision, which was a quite difficult space to create anything. As I was always saying in all the events, that direct provision, one of the worst things that direct provision does to the human being is to remove the imagination. You lose the capacity to imagine a better future, which is a very inherent human emotion. You just lose it, and that's what is happening. And confinement has a very similar effect on me, unfortunately. But yeah, maybe if it lasts longer, hopefully not, I will adapt to that. But right now, summer wasn't very productive, in fairness.
No, and I think it is. It's that sense of existential dread hanging over you. This notion that there is something out there wrong that you can do nothing about. And I think it might be. I was very interested in watching social media. I had to take a break from it for a while, but just watching the way that people reacted to the lockdown and the tiny freedoms that people really freaked out over losing. And I thought, well, this is very interesting. Imagine if all of your freedom was taken away. Just, use this. I think Irish people in particular could use this as a moment of empathy to kind of say, okay, I hate this. Imagine if I could also not work, or if I also couldn't send my children to third level education, or if I couldn't drive a car, or if I couldn't, any of the freedoms that are stripped away within the direct provision system. And so it was a very strange moment. And then, of course, all of the different horrific issues that were going on in various different direct provision centres during the lockdown. But we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Annemarie, how did you find it artistically? Was it a trying time?
Very much so. I think I'd agree with everything that Evgeny said there. The kind of the difficulty in imagining what's happening tomorrow or what's going to happen into the future has this impact on the imagination. But for me, a lot of my poems and a lot of my ideas come out of the physical landscape, come out of environment, and I'm often on the road when I'm writing poems. Now, I might not be going very far, I might just be going to Kildare or going to a different county to see a monument or a ruin, but suddenly all of that was taken away from me. And, I'm from Donegal originally, so I have that relationship with the Donegal landscape as well that is very at the center of my writing. And so for all of that to be taken away, overnight was, it really was a kind of a learning experience as well. So it's been a very tough time for artists and writers. And it's been very tough for the people affected in direct provision, no doubt, as well. Yeah.
Absolutely. And Evgeny, have you found yourself being kind of, you were so involved in all kinds of different activism, but have you found yourself during the lockdown being pulled more back into that arena because of things like the Skellig Star Hotel and various different involvements in Massey?
Initially, yes, I was quite, and I was involved in this, I think, quite successful open letter that we organized with May for Urk and with other academics, with Liam Thornton from UCD. So it was several of us who composed this open letter that was signed by almost 800 professionals, academic workers and lawyers, solicitors, barristers, health workers, direct provision, that it was a need for the urgent action there. And I think that was quite an important moment for me also to, to, to not to just sit, but to do something, because what can you do while you cannot really leave your house? There was a 2 kilometers restriction at that moment. And of course, I was also quite a lot talking to people, especially those who are very close, and they were calling me, and sometimes you don't really know what to say, but you are trying to just speak it through and do this sort of, DIY therapy and things like that. But that was and then in June, I think in June, I was quite bad since July was very tough period for me. So I kind of also took a break from social media. I didn't want to contribute a lot to the public sphere because I didn't have any energy for that. And now things are kind of re-emerging slightly with September coming and the new academic year and other stuff is happening. So I hope to be back on track a bit more. But of course, we were constantly talking to guys in Masi and stuff, and to other activists, and also I was among very few. I think it was like maybe 17 of us at the Pride Day. We met all together. It was mostly LGBT activists at the Dublin Pride and O'Connell Street at 5 a.m. And we marched with the flag, the O'Connell Street. There were no one. It was a sunrise and only us. And that was so emotional. The 28th of June, that was really something that it's very hard to translate. This feeling of community that I had marching with these wonderful people. And it wasn't the Pride that we would imagine, no? The Pride which is full of music, of, it was something so intimate, so feeling of, being together in this moment of complete unpredictability. That was very strong, and that was when you really feel proud of being LGBT and having our community, our LGBT community that makes us stronger. We always will, and we know for decades what virus means, and what does it mean live on the threat of the virus. So that was one of the probably most emotional moments of the last, or maybe of all my life, to be honest.
Yeah, that sounds so beautiful. And I think that, Pride is one of these events that's kind of under threat from corporate, from brands and all of these kind of things. So to take it back to the basics of being together in that space in the face of all of the threats that the world poses. And I think we're all aware that, despite the marriage equality referendum, there are still huge problems with, I know we're talking about Correspondences, huge issues with racism in Ireland, but also issues with homophobia as well, and homophobic attacks. So finding those moments of togetherness are so important. And especially, Evgeny, because I think you really summed up something there important, which is that we're all affected by the lockdown, I think, at different times. I found it very difficult at the beginning, really difficult at the beginning. And then I kind of came to terms with it a little bit. But then I have other friends who were great at the beginning and they were really strong, and they were really strong for me. And then a couple of months later, it hit them. So I think we all value these moments that we can manage to eke out at the moment of togetherness. But it was interesting what you said as well around, you know, activism in a time of lockdown is such a challenge too. And I also had a lot of people contacting me because during the lockdown I was selling correspondences. At one point I was selling it from this room, from my garage, because I couldn't get the stock out to bookshops. So people were emailing me and transferring money into the bank account, and I was going across I have a little shop across the road that has a post office in it. So I was going that far with gloves and masks and posting them out to people. But people wanted to know how they could help. And I didn't know what to tell them, you know, and my advice was always, well, contact Massey, see if there are charities in your local area that are working with local direct provision centres, and ask them what they need, because I think this can be a problem as well. And this was one of my worries about the book to begin with, is that it's very easy to do something very well intentioned, but you actually need to ask people what they want and what they need. And not to just decide, okay, people in direct provision, they want to come out and they want to tell their stories. Well, maybe they do, and wonderful, but maybe they don't as well. Maybe there's something else. Maybe their kids need new school bags. Maybe they need support buying books to go back to school. And I think, that's kind of one of the things that I would always encourage people to do, is to contact Massey, to contact people and make contact. And as you said, speaking to people during the time of lockdown, being in touch with them, providing community, I think is the best thing that any of us can do. And
I think we're all finding our way with that, Jessica. It's just so, in these times, it's so difficult to know how to be an advocate, how to be an activist, how to support people in need, what's appropriate, what do people need. In the months before lockdown, I was working in the Irish, doing visiting workshops in the Irish prison service. And when I'm there, I'm often thinking about, the rupture that is caused by family separation. I'm often thinking about children who are separated from their parents in prison, and about people in prison who are very vulnerable, or who may be very ill, who may be experiencing mental health difficulties. And, my mind can't even go to what a lonely time it has been with I'm sure there have been restrictions on teaching services and visitors to the prisons. And I'm still kind of getting my own head around, well, how can I adapt my practice and my activism, and what new role can I play to support students and the prisoners during these times? And, the answers are just not clear yet. So it's going to be quite some time before we reconfigure our practices and our ways of working.
Absolutely. Yeah, it really, really is. And I mean, even in my small practice, I do a lot of workshops with schools, and, none of us know what the roadmap is for working with schools and in various different public settings. And, all of that is something that we're having to, I suppose, make up as we go along. Well, I'd love to ask you now both, if you wouldn't mind, to read either another piece from Correspondences or another piece of your choosing. It would be lovely to hear a little bit more poetry. And Evgeny, can I ask you to go first this time, please? Another piece or two or three, however many you would like.
Yeah, I'll be very short. The poetry is written last year when I attended the conference organized by Frontline Defenders, which is called Dublin Platform. And I wanted to, I met so many different people from all over the world there, and it was so emotional. And I wanted to somehow document that moment of meeting. Now would be absolutely impossible to organize something like that. And so that this poetry is written to them, to frontline defenders from all over the world who met each other in Dublin. Endless string of airplanes, trains, buses and taxis, from tropical selva, Central Asian steppes, ocean coasts, from thousands of unexplored points scattered around the map like lentils on faded parquet. Some of them for the first time in their life. Others take it as a work affair. They bring painted fabrics, pewter earrings, baklava or honey melons. They carry unclimbable mountains of sorrow, loss, pride, and human dignity meeting each other. The dignity of cat is, The dignity of cat is in graceful disobedience. The dignity of dog is in strict obedience. The dignity of a wild animal is that it would always prefer death to captivity. Human dignity, paradoxically, isn't the same. And some more people, if circumstances come to that, prefer lack of freedom of body to the lack of freedom of mind, or the lack of freedom of conscience to the lack of freedom of choice. They leave the house or lock themselves in offices. They grab the keyboard like a saving straw and give their bodies, their freedom, their life to words of justice, for which at all times, in all villages, people are arrested, tortured, and killed. But without these words, everything else loses its purpose and meaning.
Oh, that's beautiful. That's so gorgeous. I love the scope of that, Evgeny. I love just this vision. I kind of had this wonderful vision of the globe at night, all lit up with these various different places. And then I think I need to get the cat's graceful disobedience on a tattoo somewhere. I love that. It's fantastic. Thank you so much. Will you read us another one?
Yeah. No, I think I've done enough, and I really would like to hear Annemarie because I love your poetry.
Wonderful, thanks so much.
I really enjoyed that piece, Evgeny, and so moved that you touched on the dignity and the life of creatures. I mean, I'm thinking about that a lot, the way that we treat animals and creatures and what we do to them, and it's sometimes just not a great sign of how we're going to treat our neighbors. So thank you for that.
Sometimes we each other too, yeah. And this is sorry, I'm interrupting, but before you, maybe it's better to end it with the poetry. But I just wanted to also say that there is how unnecessary is the direct provision in the Irish context. It's just so cruel and deliberate to have this system. And I always was saying, no one in the universe will be able to give my 2 years of life back. No one. And the only thing I did is just I asked for help, and I claimed for my international right that has been recognized. But for some reason, it took 19 months in my case, but it would take much longer for a lot of people. And this is something that we really need to be conscious that it is the responsibility of everyone who is voting, who is paying taxes, who is living here to contribute to the society as a whole, and not to segregate people, and especially people in need. So I really hope that the government that committed to end direct provision will really end it and won't substitute it with a non-for-profit direct provision. So we really hope that it won't happen, but we are looking, and we won't stop campaigning against this system, because it is just very cruel for everyone who is living. And as we discussing at the very beginning, the memory would be the key topic for me. I work a lot with the idea of memory. I was studying memory as ethnographer and social anthropologist too. So memory is something that exists everywhere. And in these terms, the very memory of direct provision will stay here for decades or maybe even longer, like Magdalene Laundry District, Magdalene Baby Homes, industrial schools. It is there. The memory is there, and that's something that we are contributing now to this bad memories, to these traumatic memories that people who are probably born here will carry with them through their life. And this is something we need to be very conscious about. It will bring this mental diseases and mental health issues to the society all the time. So the direct provision, it's damaging not only for people who are there, but for the whole society. Sorry for this political propaganda.
No, not at all. You know, Evgeny, since I worked with you, I've been thinking a lot about the history in our history in this country, our dark history of corralling people, vulnerable people, into institutions. And as you said, how that loss gets passed down from one generation to another, how that trauma gets carried forward. And it makes me so sad that we have not learned from our past and that we are still doing this today. So I maybe on that note, I might read just one section from a long poem that I've been working on called The Foundling Crib. And it's a long poem that references the history of St. James's Hospital in Dublin 8, which is next door to where I live. So the hospital has gone through the site has been home to various institutions, including the Dublin City Workhouse. And in the 1770s, the old Dublin Foundling Hospital was based there on the site of St. James's. And it's really extraordinary to me that over 120, 130 years, that over 200,000 infants were brought to the Foundling Hospital and left there. And when I say hospital, I don't mean a hospital in the way that we understand that word today. It was really an orphanage. It was a place where vulnerable children were left mostly to die because families couldn't afford to look after them. And so just before I read this, I want to say that on the corner of St. James's, the site of St. James's Hospital, there was at one stage a foundling cradle where mothers came and left their starving or dying children, and many times were unable to even come back and get those children out of the hospital if they were still alive. So we've just have this history of punishing people for being poor, for being vulnerable, for being in need. So this is the first section from The Foundling Crib. By lamplight, an aged map of Dublin reveals the city as preached by Swift. Scant lanes and alleys that run like ghost veins, pulsing the blood of women who once begged for bread and alms, who cupped their palms to strangers in Cutthroat Place, in Murdering Lane. I look down along the black steps of 3 centuries or more. I can hear the throb of water rising out of ling and heather bogs. Source is another word for church. In Rome, the poorest mothers left infants by the Tiber, and later among the nets, the fishermen found the tangled bones. Did they lay these bones out as treasure? Did they toss them back into water? Every river knows the weight of hunger. Anna Liffey, give us back our bodies. The stories of all our mothers are written on the inner walls of this city I call home. So the Foundling Hospital really set the tone and atmosphere for many of the mother and child institutions that came in the years after. It was one of the first big institutions that played a role in separating families and really kind of keeping them apart as well.
Yeah. It's a beautiful, beautiful work, Annemarie. And I think that evocation of Dublin, that ghost Dublin that exists underneath the streets that we walk every day, is so important for the reasons that Evgeny said around memory, you know, that I think that these things, you know, they do say that trauma does have an effect on the DNA. At a genetic level, trauma affects us, and we do need to deal with these things, especially as we come to, you know, 100 years of the Irish state. And I think many of us coming up to 2016 in particular were quite uncomfortable with all of this celebration, because we thought, well, actually, there's a lot of unexamined trauma there to be dealt with. And it continues, as you said, Evgeny, as well. And I mean, the current government have committed to ending direct provision. And what that means is yet to be seen. I know there are a lot of people doing work on various different advisory committees. There have been so many. And just to repeat and reinforce what you've said, Evgeny, as well, I think it is all of our duty to make ourselves aware, to educate ourselves, and to understand and to support the people in our society who are vulnerable, whether that's people in direct provision, whether that's people who are victims of the housing crisis, whether that's people who are subject to various different social stigmas that still exist. You know, and it is our duty as citizens, as both Irish and global citizens, to be aware of that. And I'm hoping that for people who are interested, and I know there are so many of them out there, and I do have a great belief in the hospitality and the empathy of the Irish people, and that I hope that this small event, as part of Ballina Fringe Festival, will do something to introduce some people to both of your wonderful work to begin with, but also to some of the very important issues we've been able to discuss this evening. And I'd just like to finish by thanking you so much for sharing your words and your ideas with us. It's been an absolute pleasure. And I know that we will all be keeping an eye out for so much more wonderful writing and activism from both of you in the years to come. Thank you so much, Evgeny Shtorn and Annemarie Churreain.